This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
The field is set, the bracket is ready, and we are here to get you all prepped to fill out your bracket and win your pools for the 2023 NCAA Men's College Basketball Tournament. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here today by two fantastic guests to help you fill out your brackets for this year's tournament. Joined here first by my typical co-host here on Covering the Spread, Dr. Ed Feng. You can find Ed's work over at thepowerrank.com, and you can find Ed on Twitter as well at thepowerrank. Ed, the bracket is set. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I'm finding this to be a pretty fun year to break things down. I think it's a year where it's necessary to break things down more than normal. I think there's a lot more parity going on in college basketball this year, although we have seen Alabama surge recently. It's a fun time. I think it's even more fun, if I get enough sleep to put in the work this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep is good, Ed. Would recommend you do that. So watch out for yourself as well, because once we get to Thursday, it is a jam-packed couple of weeks. We're also joined here by Bennett Corcoran. We've had Bennett on the past couple of years for these NCAA tournament breakdowns. Bennett now of Shot Quality. Bennett previously here with us over at numberFire, now with Shot Quality, but I needed the best minds in college basketball to break down this field. So bring it Bennett back. You can find Bennett on Twitter at 617Bennett. Again, find his work over at Shot Quality. Bennett, it is a pleasure to have you back on here for today. A pleasure to talk to you once again on a more personal level. So how you doing today?
Doing great, Jim. Great to be back. Thanks for having me. Obviously a really exciting time of year, so hyped to break everything down.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you here. Excited to have both you and Ed here, and it is going to be a fantastic show. Now, if you have not listened to our NCAA tournament breakdown in past years, here's how it works. We're going to go from top down, because if you listen to Ed, listen to Bennett, you will hear them say the national champion is what matters most. That's where the points are in winning your pool. So we're going to focus there first and then work backwards. Talk about national champions, talk Final Four contenders, talk overall strategy for your pools, because that matters a lot as well, because we want to set you up best to win your pool. So we're going to work from the top down and go that way. We'll go region by region to break down more granular stuff. We're going to start with the national championship discussion and strategy to get you all involved there from the jump. We'll dive on into all that in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast, because we have more NCAA tournament shows coming up later on this week, breaking down the Wednesday or the Thursday and the Friday games. Both those shows will be up on Wednesday on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, and of course, as always, on the FanDuel YouTube page. So go subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page, hit the like button if you're watching us live there right now, and also make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread to get these podcasts as they go live each and every weekday. Also talking NFL free agency takeaways tomorrow on the show as well. This March, take your first shot at college hoops with FanDuel Sportsbook and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 in the bracket and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to point spreads to that 5v12 seed matchup you've been eyeing, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. There is no better place to bet on the tournament than FanDuel. Sign up today. Make every moment more. FanDuel, all tournament long. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with the Kansas Star Casino, LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Kansas and Wyoming, 1-800-522-4700, or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana, 1-877-770-STOP. And in Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY, or text HOPE-NY. And in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Now, as mentioned, before we talk individual teams, it's important to start things off from a strategy perspective and let you know things you've got to know about your brackets before you fill things out. So I'm going to start things off with you here, Ed, because you wrote a book on winning your NCAA tournament pool, and that is an evergreen book. It is ideas, processes you can apply to any year. So, Ed, if you're giving advice to people who have not thought about it from a game theory perspective before, what advice are you giving people before they dig into this individual bracket?
For sure. First, just let me mention, you can get the entire book for free for signing up for my email list. So just check that out at thepowerrank.com. And I think you just need to start at the beginning and if you want to win and you don't want to wait 30 years on average to win, you should get in a small pool. It's much easier to win. It's much easier to beat like 10 people who know nothing about college basketball and than it is to win, 100-person pool with a bunch of pro college basketball bettors, right? So I highly recommend getting in a small pool. Essentially, I talk in the book about how your probability to win a pool decreases exponentially with the number of people in it. So it's good to be in a small one. I think this year is probably even a better year to be in a small pool. And so make sure you get that done now, right, before you even start picking any games. And
if you are trying to, think about it from a pool perspective, you can enter multiple pools. So if you're going to smaller pools, just add more of them. If you want to play it that way, you can still shoot for bigger prizes overall by doing that and kind of adding up the number of pools you're in to, if you want to gun for the big prizes, do it via that versus going into a massive, massive pool. What about for you, Bennett? From an overall strategy perspective, what are keys for you when it comes to filling out a bracket?
So for me, I think one of the most important things is just kind of like leveraging any available information. So we talk a lot about the like ESPN public pick percentages. That's like kind of a great baseline, especially if your pool is like a little bit more casual, to like identify what your opponents might be doing. And it kind of gives you a leg up in terms of like a game theory standpoint. The other thing that, most people probably aren't as dialed into is injuries. So that's kind of another source of information where, if you're a little bit more in tune with what's going on, then you'll have like a considerable advantage.
And that is an important thing to consider as we talk about national champions, which we'll do here in just a bit. But first, Benny, you mentioned about like a casual pool. How much are you weighing the people you're competing against? You got to know your competition. So Bennett, how much thought process are you putting into like the people you're competing against, whether it be regionality, if there are teams or fans of a certain team in your pool, whether it be how sharp they may be versus casual? How are you weighing in your competitors when filling out your bracket?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in a larger pool, I'm probably less willing to kind of like consider just because there's so many more people. But like in a smaller pool, like what Ed was referring to, if there's only like 10 people and say it's a bunch of your buddies and that a lot of them are, fans of a given team or something like that, it's definitely advantageous to probably, go against them, given that they might, be a popular selection. So.
Yeah, it's important to consider how things may change because you talked about the public numbers at ESPN. We'll talk about those in a second. Go to ESPN and find the Who Picked Whom tab. That'll tell you what the public overall is picking. But if you're in Houston, it's probably going to skew more towards Houston than it would if you are in Tuscaloosa, hypothetically. So it's important to weigh that for sure as well. Now, Ed, I want to go back to you here because you mentioned pool size and how much that matters. Let's say someone out there listening, they're entering into a work pool and it's a free one. So, they're trying to win that free pool. They're entering it in regardless, but there are a lot of people in it. So they're entering in a free pool, no ability to like choose elsewhere. How does that impact your selection, knowing that you are in a big pool versus what you're doing in like a 10-person pool with your family or whatever it may be?
For sure. I mean, you need to take more risks if you're going to win like a 500-person free pool at the office, right? So you want to pick a champ that, not a lot of other people are picking. And, it obviously depends on the size of the pool, whether, you need to go all the way to Texas A&M Corpus Christi to win it all, to win the ESPN pool out of out of I don't know what 10 million. I don't even know how many millions of people submit their brackets there. But yeah, and it's different. If you're trying to win a pool that's 10 people, you can go with a lot of favorites. You can go with a lot of chalk, which analytics will help you out with there. So you just need to take more risks if there's more people in your pool. And you can, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. In my research, I found kind of overwhelmingly like your choice of champion really affects your odds more than anything else. Yeah. I mean, like I've messed around with Final Four choices and found that it didn't really mess with your win probability too much. So it's really that choice of champion. So spend some time digging into that. And, that's where you can find an edge.
And that's where we're going to start things off here in just 1 second. But first, I did want to ask you one more question, Ed. If you get your wish and you're in a 10-person pool, smaller pool, are you playing things straight, or are you still considering public pick percentages there? Or do you just pick who you think will win each game?
Well, I mean, play things straight. I think you mean like playing kind of the favorites in chalk. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what exactly that means this year when you're talking about champion. I thought it was very obviously going to be Houston, as we've discussed on the show before, and they were just going to be the chalk favorite. But Alabama has been really impressive through one of the best conferences in the nation recently. Obviously had a great showing in the SEC tournament. And some sets of my numbers, they are on top now. So you can actually argue that chalk is picking Alabama as your champion. I think if we get to a championship game with Houston and Alabama and both sides have full health, meaning Marcus Sasser is going to come back from injury, meaning no one decides to prosecute Brandon Miller of Alabama before that game, I actually think Houston's going to be a slight favorite.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that national champion. Yeah, let's talk about it, because right now Houston is a favorite over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Houston 5-1 to win it all over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Ben, I want to start things off for you, because it sounds like Ed is leaning towards Alabama and Houston as being the top two teams, and not really sure which one should be top between those two. So Bennett, what about for you? When you look at the top of the pool this year, who do you think, when you're picking things more straight up, is the national champion in 2023?
Yeah, so I agree, and I kind of think Houston has the best overall chance, despite the fact that Alabama has been playing, considerably better down the stretch here. Ed touched on the Marcus Sasser injury stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But that's obviously something that you definitely have to consider. If you're not aware, Marcus Sasser is Houston's point guard, and he missed the conference championship game on Sunday. Seems like, based on just like interviews and things like that, it seems like it was kind of like an abundance of caution and expected to play throughout the tournament. But obviously, if we get, any sort of news on that front for the worse, then that's something you should certainly, take into account. But yeah, I would say for where I'm thinking, I mean, I do think Houston is kind of the, the top choice in my mind, especially when you consider that most people are picking Bama. But I do think Bama is, probably the second most likely team. And then you kind of see there's a bit of a teardrop. And so, some of these other teams like Kansas, for example. So I'm pretty in line with what we're looking at right here with the sportsbook odds.
Now, Bennett used the word tier. Ed, do you agree that it's Houston, Alabama, and then everyone else in terms of you're tiering things out for the national champion?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's some teams that I might put in that same tier, and we can talk about them a little bit later. But I don't know. I mean, I think what's funny is, when I look at Kansas and Purdue, so I kind of agree where Houston and Alabama are at. I think that tells you all you need to know about what the markets think about whether Marcus Sasser is coming back.
Right.
And it should also be noted that he missed the end of last season. He missed kind of midway through the season, through the end of last season. They were still incredible. It took an abysmal 1-for-20 shooting performance from three to not make the Final Four last year. That was against Villanova in the Elite Eight. So they do have a track record. I mean, when you look at it objectively, yeah. I mean, Marcus Sasser clearly matters. He's probably the best player. So when I look at this, we'll get to Purdue later. That's kind of funny to me that they're that high. I don't really love UCLA either. So I think it's wide open, and I think the analysis will kind of reflect that. I think it's kind of wide open, and there's a lot of teams that can make some noise in this tournament.
Now, Bennett, the one bummer here is that this isn't DFS. There's no late swap. So when we submit our pools and that first game tips off on Thursday, we're locked in and we can't change things based on the availability of Marcus Sasser. So you look at their first weekend, Northern Kentucky first, and then Iowa or Auburn in the second round. Iowa could put up a lot of points, but not the best year for the Big Ten. Auburn is there as well. And I think that at least numberFire's metrics have that game being decently close. How confident are you in Sasser's health? Does the concern around that make you lean away from Houston, or what's your read on that as of now? Again, we'll get more info hopefully before Thursday, but as of right now, how much do you weigh the Sasser injury when deciding what to do for the national champion?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. So I think for, thinking about the first, game or two, I think even if he was, against the 16 seed, respectfully, but even if he was a little limited or didn't play at all, I think they would, still take care of business. Iowa and Auburn, I still kind of think, Houston would be, favored without him. Although I will say, I believe that game would be in Tuscaloosa. So if it's Auburn, kind of a raw draw, but I do think when it's really going to be more about, kind of that second weekend, in terms of how much, how kind of, comfortable is he going to be out there? I do think it seems like to me that, some of this uncertainty with regards to his injury status is baked into the line a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think, I still feel pretty good about him ultimately playing, but it's really about effectiveness. And I think that's kind of why you have to downgrade a little bit because, he's obviously going to try to give it a go. It's the NCAA tournament. Right. But it's just how effective is he going to be basically.
Yeah, Houston was 5-1, shortened to plus 470 briefly, but then lengthened back out to 5-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. So mixed signals there, but it does seem like he should play. But like you said, the question more so about effectiveness. Now, we talked a couple of times about the public pick percentages. Let's shift over and talk about those right now. As of right now, over at ESPN, 21.9% of all brackets have Alabama winning. Houston is at 12.6%. Ed, it sounds like based on what you've said so far, Houston may be undervalued by the public, but what's your overall read on what your numbers say at the power rank, what your feel is relative to what the public has specifically here for the national championship game?
Right. I mean, that Houston percentage keeps ticking up, which keeps meaning there's less value and less contrarian value and kind of picking them as your champion. My numbers are, actually down on them a little bit. They'll put it closer to 11%. I think that's on the low side. I think it's closer to 15% there. But yeah, I mean, it does make it tough, right? I mean, I always stare at this every year and hope that it goes in a way that allows for some good contrarian choices, and it never does. It never has over any of the last couple of years.
No. The year Virginia won, they were pretty low because people were down on them after the first round exit, and that they actually, I believe your numbers had them higher than the public did. I believe that was the case.
My numbers had them significantly higher than the public, but that was a once in a lifetime where a team lost to a 16 seed the year before.
Right.
So that's probably never going to happen again. And that year was even a horror show because Duke started in the 40s in terms of public pick percentage and then gently slid into 1/3, which is exactly what I had. And I was like, gotta stop writing books about this stuff.
Now, what about for you, Bennett? When you look at these numbers here, based on the current public pick percentages, which teams do you think are undervalued to win it all for this year?
So I mean, we talked about Houston a little bit. I think my numbers are a bit higher on Houston than what Ed has, but I honestly think with a healthy Sasser, I would put them, closer to what we're seeing with Bama here at the 20-ish% range. Yeah. And I've kind of discounted them a little bit given the uncertainty, to where I still have it higher than what we're seeing here, but it's more 17 or 18%. And then I don't really see any value on Bama or Kansas. I mean, you might get some small value in some of these longer shots that are somewhere between the 4 to 8% chance. Kind of like what Ed was saying earlier in terms of parity. I do think that kind of tier is larger than we see in most years, where usually there's a couple, more like favorites that people kind of gravitate towards too. And then there's like, maybe, a few other teams that have, 5+% chance. But I feel like that tier this year is substantial. So if Houston does kind of continue to tick up and you're in a larger pool, you might want to consider pivoting some of these other teams farther down the list here.
Do you have a favorite among those other teams? Like, let's say, again, you're in a huge pool. You have no choice, aka me. I'm asking for myself here. I'm in a huge pool, Bennett. And I'm trying to decide, do I go with that or do I take into account the fact that there's a lot of parity this year? There could be a bit more wide open than usual. It's harder to swallow chalk on Alabama, Houston, when there are a lot of teams that could realistically contend. So it sounds like, based on your numbers, Houston is undervalued, and that matters, even in a large pool. But if you're looking for a pivot, is there one that stands out to you right now?
Yeah, it's tricky. So we'll get into the kind of region by region breakdown in a bit, but a couple of the teams that I had kind of circled as, potentially, longer shots that would be undervalued, ended up in the same region. So it's basically, I was keeping my eye on like a UConn or like a Gonzaga but yeah, no, I mean, I think the path is like fairly difficult to where, it's going to be hard just to be able to kind of progress, through that kind of gauntlet, but still kind of keeping my eye on it. If you're in, some of these pools that we were talking about where it's, much larger as opposed to, if you're in a pool of 10 people, I wouldn't take a national champion pick that has like a 4% shot. But if you're going up to against a few hundred people, why not take a stab at, it's one of these kind of dark horses, I guess.
Ed, what about for you? Any favorites among the contrarian options if you're in a larger pool to win the national championship?
I mean, I still think Houston is kind of your best bet simply because they're going to have the largest probability. They're going to have the largest chance of winning. There is still some contrarian value there, so I'm going to stick with that.
Okay, so focusing primarily on Houston as far as the national championship, especially if we get good news on Marcus Sasser before things tip off on Thursday. Let's now go region by region and break down how things broke down there. We'll start things off in the South, where Alabama is the 1 seed, and obviously we talked about how Alabama might be overvalued to win the whole thing. But Bennett, when you look at the South region specifically, are you deviating there, or is Alabama still the pick for you, at least to make it in the Final Four from this region?
Yeah, so I'm actually deviating here. So I think, we talked about skewing Houston to, ultimately win the whole thing. And if a lot of people are going to take Bama, you can kind of pick up some additional leverage by, sending them home early. So taking a look at this, I know we were talking about the public pick percentages earlier. I think they're about 50% or so, give or take, to get to the Final Four. My numbers have that, a decent bit lower. So I think this is a great chance to, pick somebody kind of from the bottom half of the region to kind of make a run here and get to the Final Four.
And when you look at the bottom half, Bennett, is there one team that you like most if you're trying to fade Alabama? Are you looking at an Arizona, a Baylor, maybe a Creighton if you're going to get weird? What stands out to you when you are trying to dump Alabama out of there before the Final Four?
Yeah, no. So I think honestly the three teams that you just listed, I think their probability of advancing to the Final Four is all like fairly similar between Arizona, Baylor, and Creighton. Creighton is probably going to be the least likely picked of that group, I would say. So I probably would skew that way. Baylor is very talented as well, particularly their guard play, although their defense is just not, quite what we saw 2 years ago when they won the national championship. I think Creighton's kind of an interesting pick, to be honest.
Okay, Ed, what about for you? Again, as Bennett mentioned, the Final Four odds in the public pick percentages, Alabama, 54.6%. That's really high. But you also said that you've got Alabama, in some of your numbers higher than Houston. So do you deviate from Alabama in this region, or do you do so later on in the bracket?
No, I like Alabama to make the Final Four. The only thing that worries me a little bit is that, they're on such a good streak in the SEC tournament. Maybe they hit a little bit of a bad bump. They have allowed a very minuscule 3-point field goal percentage allowed, so you expect some regression there. So certainly some worries that they might not make it through, but this region is like kind of well seeded in some sense, right? You got a 2 in Arizona that's also kind of a top 10 team, a good team, but a team that is not as good on defense as they were last year when they were better. You have a 3 in Baylor that it's kind of like right around the top 10. It's kind of a well seeded kind of region, whereas some of the others aren't. And I'll take Alabama to come out of here.
Okay, so you got Alabama emerging. Ed, are there any higher seeded teams, that you're wary of? Any higher seeded teams that you think maybe we're a bit overseeded? It sounds like you are on board with this region being seeded pretty well overall.
Overall, yes, it's seeded pretty well. Well, we can talk about some absurdly overseeded teams a little bit later.
Okay. Any upsets you're eyeing here, Bennett, in the South region? You mentioned potentially having an upset as far as the Final Four, but what are you looking at in terms of lower seeded teams that might be able to put on a show here?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think Furman is kind of interesting over UVA. UVA, we've seen like their national championship notwithstanding, which obviously is a huge caveat, but they've had some, recent struggles in the first round with, as kind of the higher seeded team. And I think Furman is kind of well equipped to take advantage. So, I mean, they do a really good job of not turning the ball over and they shoot a ton of threes. And I think the kind of like Virginia pack line defense, they kind of are inviting you to kind of tee off from three. So I do think it kind of does play well into Furman's hands. And if they have a hot night, they can certainly advance. So.
Okay, so Furman, the 13 seed, facing off with Virginia, the 4 seed. Now, Virginia not quite as slow as they have been in years past. That was part of the reason they were susceptible to an upset in the UMBC year, was that they were just so slow. It increased variance and stuff like that, but not quite as bad there in that regard. Ed, what about for you? Any upsets you're eyeing here early on in the South region?
No, not really. I mean, this was a chalky region, if I remember correctly. I respect Bama. I think if you're going to play the odds, they're going to come out of here.
Okay, so we're liking Alabama on the Final Four, at least on Ed's side. Bennett eyeing maybe a Creighton, maybe a Baylor, maybe an Arizona here as far as teams that could emerge there. And then potentially Furman as an upset, at least in Bennett's eyes, for the East region. Any final thoughts for you, Bennett, before we move on and talk about the East?
No, let's get into it.
All righty, well, let's talk about the East now, where Purdue is the 1 seed. And Ed, we've talked Purdue a bit on this show here so far this year. You're lower on Purdue than the public is in general. And it sounds like that is true here based on the betting markets, based on, public pick percentages and stuff like that. So how are you viewing them now that we know what their draw is for this year's tournament?
I want to get for my children, like the kindness that Purdue and Marquette have been afforded in this region. Like whatever I can do, I will do that. This is we often talk about the group of death in World Cup. Yeah. This is the region of eternal life. I think you can legitimately make an argument that there's not a single top 10 team in the nation in this bracket. Neither Purdue nor Marquette were in the top 25 of the preseason AP poll. You certainly have to respect what they have done. Zach Edey's had a great season for Purdue. They've been a really good team. Marquette, man, they had a really good performance against UConn, knocking them out of the Big East tournament. Tyler Kolek is an amazing player, but neither of these teams are really good. There's a couple teams in the West. If we plugged them in as a 4 seed here, I would make like a definitive favorite to come out of this region. So this is, you can kind of go down this list and look at teams that could potentially come out of here. Kentucky is probably a very underseeded 6 team. Tennessee has dropped to a 4 after they lost their point guards, Akai Ziegler. Probably a little underseeded, really a great defensive team. Haven't been playing like you recently, but a team that's going to get down and really make you work for your buckets. Duke is a team that won their conference, even though it might be a weak conference, but a team that certainly has there's no shortage of talent, even though Coach K is gone. So this is, if you go kind of strictly by the numbers, like you would kind of see Purdue and Marquette at the end, but I kind of don't expect to see that. I think there's going to be a lot of chaos in this region. And yeah, I think it's going to be fun to watch.
So even though you view it as being a weaker region, you still want to find ways to deviate from Purdue and Marquette here, correct?
I mean, I think you can.
Yeah. Okay.
I think if you looked at my numbers on my site, I think you would have Purdue and Marquette like meeting in the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's going to happen. I think there's a lot. I think like Duke and Kentucky are like underachieving, high ceiling teams that could potentially play pretty well. Yeah, I mean, Kansas State is massively overseeded as a 3. I find that pretty funny. So I don't really expect them to go kind of far. Michigan State's tough. Yeah, just an interesting region overall.
Okay, let's talk to you now, Bennett. Ed is not super high on Purdue, not super high on Marquette, but also having troubles finding a good team to deviate with them here. So, Bennett, what about for you? Who is your Final Four emerger in the East?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much in agreement with Ed here. I think this region is definitely the most likely to be kind of like chaotic and, you know, some higher seeded team that you weren't really seeing, makes a big run. Not quite as sold on some of the top teams. I think with Purdue, it was kind of interesting. Like a month ago, I think a lot of people were out on Purdue. And I was kind of interested to see, how they would look from like the public pick percentage stuff. And then of course they just, rip through the Big Ten tournament. Now everybody's back in. So I'm kind of back out. Marquette, I mean, yeah, they kind of had a similar story of like, running through, Big East, regular season and conference tournament. And I think my numbers are just a bit lower on them. So yeah, it's tricky here. I also am like very out on Kansas State. So, when you look at who's left basically, and like, where you're ultimately going to go, I mean, my numbers show some slight value on Tennessee. I am a little bit concerned, as Ed mentioned, with the Zakai Ziegler injury. He's missed, he tore his ACL, but he's missed the last few games. But even before that, they weren't really in great form. This is a team that is elite defensively, but really struggles to score. So, now all of a sudden missing one of your key offensive initiators, it's a little concerning, But I do think if you're going to take, kind of a contrarian shot as opposed to just going with, the Purdue and Marquette, I still do think like Purdue and Marquette are probably the most likely, as Ed said. But I think if you're going to kind of go a little bit against the grain, I would consider Tennessee and also Kentucky, honestly. I think for Kentucky, I mean, they have some kind of injury stuff to monitor as well. Between Case and Wallace missing a little bit of time and Severe Wheeler out the last like month or so, they've had to play like games at a time where they have 0 point guards. That's not fun.
Not ideal.
In March Madness, but Kaysen seems okay. I mean, he basically is just, he's tough, but he's playing through it basically. I don't think he's going to miss any time. But that kind of lack of depth is a little bit concerning. But yeah, there's no one team here that I feel really great about. So I think especially in a larger pool, taking like kind of a long shot might be a better look. In a smaller pool, I mean, I think given the like high degree of uncertainty, I would probably just chalk it up. I wouldn't. It's tough to like guess, even if you think that this one region is gonna kind of go crazy. It's tough to find the exact dart to throw and really nail it. So I think I would be more conservative in a smaller size pool, but I think in a larger pool, this is kind of where you get weird.
Yeah, fading Purdue or Marquette is one thing, but then identifying correctly who benefits is tougher, and that's a difficult thing. So, Ed, I want to go back to you. You mentioned Tennessee, Duke, Kentucky as potential spots to go to get a little bit weird. Do you have a preference between those three? Are you mixing things up? How do you feel about that in terms of your favorite of that group?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have a favorite. Again, I think, as Bennett said, it's going to be who happens to play well. Bennett did mention that Purdue ripped through the Big Ten tournament. I will note that they did not have to play any of the next 5 best ranked teams by my numbers in that said Big Ten tournament, and they still, kind of squeaked through with the win. I think that kind of tells you all you need to know about this Purdue team. As you mentioned too, like I kind of forgot about this team. I think we talked about it on the pod, Jim, and I was like, yeah, Purdue, a little overrated. I was kind of seeing that in my numbers. And then I woke up Sunday night and I was like, oh, geez, they're on the one seat. They're on the one line. I guess I have to acknowledge them somehow. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Like they could make it all the way through. I just somehow I just don't see it.
So looking into Tennessee, looking to Duke, looking to Kentucky as potential spots to pivot as far as teams going deep here within the East. But I want to go back to you. You mentioned Kansas State. You think that they are overseeded. Where do you think that bites them? Could it be a first round game against Montana State, or are we talking more so once they meet Kentucky or Providence in the second round?
Yeah, my numbers are going to have, let's see, Kansas State. So, it looks like 88% to go through that first round match. So, you're probably looking at the next team. I mean, Kentucky, again, is a team that's underachieved, but has a high ceiling with Oscar Tshiebwe and some other really good players there. We'll see. A lot of the same core was that one seed last year, right? That got upset, I think, by St. Peter's, right? So yeah, let's say Kentucky.
Okay, so Kansas State potentially leaving early in that 3-6 matchup. What about for you, Ben? Any upsets you're looking at here in the earlier rounds in the East?
Yeah, I'm also not a big fan of Kansas State. I don't really think they're gonna lose that first game, but yeah. I think it could be closer. I took the points, so we'll see. I think, I think for that game too, though, that could, certainly be susceptible to an upset. They turn it over a ton, and they're very reliant on basically just Keontae Johnson or Marquise Noel to really, create an isolation. And I'm just not quite as sold. I think as far as like some of these other teams that could potentially, lower seeded teams that could make a move. I like Oral Roberts. We got to talk about it. I think Max Saban is just so good, but I mean Duke has really been playing very well. So I don't know if I have the stomach to, actually take Oral Roberts. But if anything, it'll be a very entertaining game. I do kind of think as we kind of get deeper into this, if you really aren't believing in Purdue, I do think picking like a Memphis or an FAU to kind of make it to the weekend is kind of interesting. So especially Memphis, I think would match up very, very well against Purdue. They force turnovers at a very high rate. And Purdue is a lot of, younger guards in their backcourt. And then also just like, playing with a much faster pace, whereas Purdue, very much wants to slow it down and just kind of like grind you down with, Zach-y post-ups. So I think, that potential matchup, I try not to do like, way too much into what one possible matchup could be when we, still have to play a whole other game before that. And FAU is very good, but I think that could be like an interesting spot if we actually do get there.
How big of a pool would you need, Bennett, to have Purdue leave in the second round? Like, are we talking like 30? How big do you need to get before you decide to dump Purdue on the first weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was in a pool with 30 people, I would at least consider it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of other, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but like, other things to consider and, who else, might be in the pool and stuff like that.
Right.
But, if you think a lot of people are just going to be putting Purdue right through, it could be a decent opportunity.
Okay, well, let's shift focus here and talk about the Midwest, where Houston is the 1 seed, and we talked about them, Ed, as being the national championship favorites right now. So it sounds like we're pretty high on them to emerge from this Midwest. Any other teams you think could give them a fair fight out here, or are you considering getting off Houston later on if you don't make them your national champion?
I like Houston to come out of this region. I think they're the best team in the country. If I were Kelvin Sampson, I wouldn't let Marcus Sasser even dress for the 16 versus the 16 seed. Let him come back on the weekend when you're either playing Iowa or Auburn. The team that like kind of confuses me in this region is Texas, the 2 seed. I don't really know what to think. They've been great by the numbers. An elite team, looks pretty good on both offense and defense, but it's a program that's had some turmoil with Chris Beard being let go during the middle of the season. They've obviously done really well. But it's also interesting because, you know, none of the players on that team really scare you in any way. You know, it's kind of a team of really good players that seems to be gelling pretty well. You know, they really thrashed Kansas in the Big 12 championship game, but I kind of felt like that was just more like just an awful defensive game from Kansas. I don't feel like I can give Texas too much credit, maybe a little bit. So that's a team that I want to say that they're a little overrated, but they are on the 2 line. They do look good in the numbers, so it's hard for me to kind of figure that team out yet. Either way, I mean, you know, I don't expect them to beat Houston.
And you mentioned that they don't have a lot of like high-end talent, and that matters for you. You will look at preseason polls and sometimes factor those in. Why is that a factor for you, Ed, when it comes to filling things out when we're in March and we've had a lot of games since that time?
For sure. I mean, the preseason AP poll is a surprising predictor of postseason success. And the reason is wisdom of crowds. You have, you know, no one sports writer is going to have a perfect poll heading into the preseason, but you put together enough of them and you get a pretty good assessment of team strength. Texas was, I think, 12th in the preseason AP poll, which is, again, you know, something that is kind of between where they ended up in the numbers, which was pretty good, you know, maybe top 5-ish. And, you know, so that suggests that there was a little bit less talent. That's when you thought you had Chris Beard there, who's a defensive mastermind, and they have been good on the defensive side of the ball. So, yeah, I definitely look at the preseason poll. You know, that's one reason I would make the argument that, you know, Kentucky is a high ceiling team that has kind of underachieved during the course of the season. I think they were top 5 in the preseason poll. So yeah, definitely look at that. I definitely look at NBA mock drafts as well to see which of these players have upside. You know, sometimes it doesn't matter. I remember last year we were talking with someone on the podcast, and I was saying that like North Carolina's Brady Manick couldn't defend anyone on Duke, and then it turned out in that Final Four matchup, like he was actually pretty good on defense in some critical possessions. And I just kind of lost it kind of there. So yeah, in general, you definitely want to bet on talent and high upside. It doesn't always work out. But that's kind of my process.
Okay. Bennett, let's go to you now. It sounds like based on your numbers, where Houston is undervalued to win it all, they're probably going to be undervalued to win the Midwest as well. Is that the case for you? Anyone else you're considering here, or what's your view of the Final Four contenders in this region?
Yeah, my numbers are pretty aligned with you know, the pick percentages that are out there for Houston to advance to the Final Four. I do really like Texas, and I think they're kind of the clear second best team in this region. So I will probably just go with the top 2 seeds to get to the Elite Eight and face off. I also, you know, I'm not a huge fan of some of these other kind of like, you know, middle seed teams in this region. So I think they are kind of like a clear cut above. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm expecting.
Yeah. So it looks like Houston and Texas, so the teams we're focusing on here. Bennett, it sounds like we have a lot of chances to deviate elsewhere. So if you're swallowing chalk in any region, is it most likely to be the Midwest this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially if you're going to go Houston anyway. So you're obviously going to put them through. And then I think, you know, rounding out the rest of this region, I'm looking pretty chalky, give or take, you know, one of these, you know, minor upsets in the first round type thing. But I think, you know, the higher seeds will hold for most of the way.
So no major deviations in terms of the upper end, but Ben, any upsets you do like here in the Midwest as far as the earlier round games?
Yeah, so I have my eye on a couple. So I think I'm lower on Iowa State. I'm also they're going to play a potential play-in team.
Yeah, Mississippi State going up against Pittsburgh in that first.
Exactly. Game. Yeah. So I'm also low on Pitt. So if Mississippi State wins, I think I would take them against Iowa State. Okay. It would be a very gross game because they both turn it over a ton and turn you over a ton, and it would be, you know, a very messy game. But I do think, like, given the kind of like similar styles, that you might be able to scoop up some value there. If, you know, obviously, you know, depending on what happens in the first 4. I also like Drake over Miami. I'm just, we talked about the ACC a little bit and how I'm just kind of lower on a lot of these teams. And I think that's, prevalent just based on the, what we've talked about so far. But Drake, I think, I would say they don't do a ton of the stuff that you would typically look for in like an underdog first round matchup. But I just think they're like considerably more talented than they're getting credit for with their seed here. So it's not like the type of team that's going to play really slow and get a lot of offensive rebounds but like really they have their best player, Tucker DeVries, is like going to go to the NBA. So I just think like most people, you see Drake and you would never think like, this team has like, real high level talent.
Redemption.
I think the line is reflective of the fact that it's probably going to be a close game. I mean, I think we're seeing like 2.5s now. So yeah, I mean, it's an upset, but it's, I'm not really, it's not the greatest upset, so.
You did redeem yourself within the state of Iowa, though, talking down on Iowa State earlier. You did redeem yourself by talking up Drake. So you're now welcome back in Ames, wherever it may be. You're allowed to go back. I didn't realize all the Iowa teams are in the same region. Anyway, you are allowed to go back now. Ed, what about for you? Any upsets you see here in the Midwest in the earlier rounds? It sounds like we're going pretty chalky beyond that.
Probably. I mean, Texas A&M intrigues me. This is a team that's done pretty well in the SEC, really tough conference, made it all the way to the finals of the SEC tournament. A team with some talented guards. So, Texas A&M over Texas. I mean, obviously Texas is going to be favored in that game, but that I wouldn't be surprised if Texas A&M won.
And numberFire's numbers have that about 70%, which is probably lower, or probably lower for Texas than what you might see in the public pick percentages for that game. So if we do get Texas versus Texas A&M, that could be a fun spot to look at as well. Final region we have not yet discussed is the West. And the number one seed in the West is Kansas. But as discussed before, a lot of good teams here. So Ed, you said that the East is the region of eternal life. The West probably is a death region. So I want to ask you from like an overall perspective, does the strength of this region impact your willingness to put any of these teams in the national championship game, knowing they could potentially be out early with how many tough teams there are here?
For sure. I mean, it's all accounted for in the numbers. So, you would see a team like maybe Gonzaga have a higher, I don't even want to know what their win probability would be if they were in the East, but yeah, no, I mean, that should be reflected in the numbers, right? But yeah, this is the region of death, right? It's probably UCLA is probably one of the best 2 seeds out there. They're really going to get hurt, but they might not be the same without Jalen Clark, one of the better players, but they're still a really good teteam. Of course, Northwestern's probably going to win it all, right, Jim? So
obviously, I saw someone on Facebook. DJ is my guy. He's been in our Facebook chats for a long time, dating back years. He said Boise State was his sleeper, and DJ, come on, man, just look at the hat. Look at the hat. I also have Boise State winning mine. Don't tell the Alumni Association, but we'll say publicly they're going to win it all. Sure, we'll go with that.
You just look through this region, Gonzaga, like TCU's not a bad team at all. I mean, Gonzaga's not going to be favored by too much, even getting to the Sweet 16. You look at the other side, Connecticut is a really good team coming out of the Big East. Got a couple of probable NBA players at the wing position. Good on both sides of the ball. St. Mary's is like a very underrated, really good defensive team that I really like, a program that I always respected. Yeah. So anyways, it's hard. It's hard in this region. Really excited to see some good basketball coming out of here.
How big is your consideration set, Ed, when it comes to deciding who to have in the Final Four from the West?
Wait, say that again.
How big is your consideration set? Like, how many teams do you think have the upside to win the West this year?
A lot. If you're going to pick against the 1 seed, this is probably the best region to do it. I think you have some really good teams in Gonzaga and Connecticut. Wouldn't be surprised if either one of those came out.
Do you have a favorite deviation spot here, Ed, in the West? Preferred team you want to go to, or still trying to work that out, given we have a couple of days left before tip?
Yeah, still trying to work it out a little bit.
Okay, Bennett, what about for you? What's your view of this West overall, and who do you think is going to make it in the Final Four here?
So this is a really interesting region. I mean, I just think, obviously, I completely agree with Ed that it's, clearly the most stacked, region out of the four here. I do think Kansas is just getting overpicked. I mean, I think they're a very good team, but I think most people that are just kind of tuning in, oh, this team won last year, oh, they're on the one line again. Not really too much consideration to how great this group really is. So I'm probably going to, be off of Kansas because of that. UCLA, I mean, they're not getting picked a ton, but at the same time, I think the injury stuff, which we talked about a little bit. So, Jaden Clark, their kind of best wing defender, is going to be out for the whole tournament. And then, their freshman center, Adembona, missed the Arizona game. That was their conference championship game on Saturday. A lot of good big men in this region, so that's a bit of a concern if he can't go. I still haven't really seen much in terms of what his status is, but that's another thing to keep an eye on. So to me, I mean, I kind of teased it at the beginning, but I kind of like, teams like Gonzaga, teams like UConn, to potentially make a move. I do think the four of them are kind of, sure. I think, some of these longer shots, like, St. Mary's, I respect a lot, and same with TCU, but I just think given the quality of the region, I think it really boils down to these four teams. And I think, a lot of it is also dependent on things like pool size. But I think based on kind of the just, pick percentage type stuff, I would say UConn and Gonzaga are two that I'm kind of keying in on.
Right now, Gonzaga is in the Final Four in 16.8% of brackets at ESPN, and UConn is in 8.8%. So both those teams, not super, super high. Gonzaga is above UConn here, 16.8% again versus 8.8%. When you hear those, Bennett, lean for you, do you want to go Gonzaga, or does the increased allure of UConn all the way down to 8.8% draw you their direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, with pool size, I mean, I think if you're in a much larger pool, I think UConn is appealing just because I show a lot more value on UConn at that 8% than I would at Gonzaga at 17 or 15%. So I think, UConn's a team that if you're in a larger pool is probably worth consideration. They do have a trickier path, which I mean is reflective in the kind of lower percentage, but that really good defensive team, a lot of balance. Really struggled back in January and are starting to really find their form. Team I have a lot of confidence in for sure. So,
okay, Ed, I want to talk to you here quickly. It sounds like the one thing we've settled on potentially is not being on Kansas to emerge in the Final Four from this region. Where are you at in a smaller pool? Are you okay with Kansas there, or even in a smaller pool, are you looking to lean into the chaos a tiny bit and fade them there?
I'm looking to lean into the chaos. Bennett brought up a really interesting point. Kansas won it all last year. They're on the one line again. So, of course, they're going to make the Final Four. I think there could be nothing further from the truth. Last year, they had Ochai Agbaji, they had Christian Braun, two wings that are getting regular minutes in the NBA right now. And now they have Jalen Wilson, who's a good player, but he is not Ochai Agbaji. You just look at his numbers. They're just not. And they have Grady Dick, who's a freshman wing, who I think has a lot of potential, but he often looks like a freshman, at least when I turn on Kansas games. They are not the same type of offensive team that they were last year. And it's really, really not the same team. There's no David McCormack taking up space in the middle. Jalen Wilson at 6'8" is their tallest player. They're actually playing some remarkable defense given their lack of size. But, I was looking at my numbers from last year. If Gonzaga was kind of my prohibitive favorite in the numbers, but the second team was Kansas. So they're also on the one line, kind of flew under the radar a little bit just because, I did like Gonzaga so much. Given that, I guess it's not surprising that they were able to kind of work their way towards a national title. I just don't think it's the same team. They're
And
good.
so even in smaller pools,
I don't want to underestimate them. They're still a really good team.
Sure. Yeah, they're a 1 seed for a reason. But even in smaller pools, it does sound like both Bennett and Ed are off of Kansas emerging from the West. Ed, any early round upsets you're eyeing here in the West region?
Early round upsets. Jim, you know I don't specialize in this, but
Your favorite topic. I should clarify too
I'm
that
not sure.
upset,
What?
I should clarify upset as well means not a betting upset because there is a 10 seed in this region that is favored over the 7 seed. Again, I'll take my hat off of that. Yeah, that's I think it was 1 last I saw. Maybe it was
interesting.
2.
I really haven't looked at spreads much, but like my numbers, I was going to just say Boise State just to irk you, but it is Northwestern minus
some of
my stuff. I did have Northwestern going through here, even though I feel like they're a team that's record has been better than their underlying metrics, but I have them over Boise State.
It is a 1.5 point spread right now for that game. Northwestern is actually favored, which is surprising to me, but no complaints. Anyway, Bennett, what about you? Any early round upsets you like here in the West region?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably famous last words, but I don't have any that I love, to be honest. I think, we talked about how good the kind of top teams are, and I don't see any of them bowing out early. I mean, the closest, like, in terms of, like, point spread seems to be probably that St. Mary's VCU game. VCU is a team, like, when they won their conference tournament, I was thinking, depending on the matchup, they generate a lot of turnovers, and, it's possible that it might work out, but I think it's a tough matchup against the St. Mary's team. Really don't turn the ball over much at all, and they don't get sped up very easily. So I am probably just going to stick with the Gales there. But yeah, I don't have a ton of, these kind of 5-12, 6-11 type games that, that I feel great about. So,
I mean, don't force it. If you have a lot of respect for a St. Mary's, a lot of respect for Gonzaga, et cetera, then just, have them going further elsewhere and you've got so many ways to deviate elsewhere. Kind of use that to your advantage. Don't force, in general, upsets where they aren't there, and kind of play things based on that and potentially find ways to deviate later on the brackets. That is each region, but I want to go to both of you right now and ask you for any final thoughts on this 2023 men's college basketball tournament before we send off everyone to fill out their brackets. Ed, let's start things off with you. Any final words of wisdom, any final thoughts you had out there before we close up shop for today?
I would just say I really do think it's a year of parity. It's not like last year when Gonzaga was a huge favorite. It's not like 2019 when Duke was a huge favorite. We've talked about Alabama. We've talked about Houston. I think those are really good basketball teams, but it could get really wild. And I think it's kind of more important to kind of dig under the surface. Look at that preseason AP poll to look for upside. Look at injuries to see, whether those guys matter. And there are a lot of key injuries. We've talked about a bunch of them, the Zakai Ziegler of Tennessee and Jalen Clark at UCLA. There's probably some that I'm forgetting as well. So I think it's a fun year. I think that might be bad for my business, but I think it's going to be a fun year to watch basketball. It's going to be great.
You say it could be bad for business, but also it could be good for the pre-business in the sense that when there's more parity, I think advanced numbers matter even a bit more, don't they?
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that. And I think, like, with the way that I dig into stuff for members of my site, like, that's going to be more important. And I hope those insights are right. I hope the teams that I think have a chance to maybe surprise and win a national championship are the ones that actually do so. The metrics do matter. And in particular, I think some of the metrics that I keep behind my paywall are pretty important because they get past just kind of the year-long numbers that a lot of other sites will have. For example, I think someone was telling me that 538 has like Houston at 25% or something using season-long numbers. That's a little too high.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting year, at least for me, to kind of dig into teams to say, okay, well, which one of these models that I have really reflect the true strength of this team? how do I adjust for that based on what's happened, injuries, so on and so forth. Does Bill Self was in the hospital all week for the Big 12 tournament. How much does that matter? And on the surface, it seemed like it really mattered because Kansas stunk against Texas. They were really bad, and they got blown out by 20 points. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to dig into this stuff, and we might see some wild stuff in this tournament.
It could be a lot of fun. Doesn't sound like Bill Self will be able to coach during the tournament. He's out of the hospital now, but scary situation for sure there. What about for you, Bennett? Any final words of wisdom before we send people off to fill out their brackets?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Ed about the kind of parity this year. And I would just kind of, try to pay attention to, the different paths that each team has. And, trying to find spots where, you're just have a greater chance of getting, even to that kind of Final Four track. So regions like the East, where we talked about, where it's, it could be a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely one to watch. But yeah, no, just really excited for everything to get going.
It should be a lot of fun. I know we finished up talking about individual regions, upset stuff like that, but it's important to remember what matters most. That is finding your national champion, getting all those points, and using strategy to your advantage based on pool size and much more. That is all that we have here for today. So I want to give a big thank you once again to Bennett Corcoran and Dr. Ed Feng. You can find Bennett on Twitter at 617Bennett. Bennett, I appreciate the time. Good luck to you with your bracket. Anything, where can people want to find your work over at Shot Quality if they want to dig into the numbers you have over there before the tournament begins?
Yeah, no, thank you. So over at shotqualitybets.com, we have a lot of analytical tools, game predictions. We have like a value finder bracket where it's basically kind of leveraging some of this public pick percentage stuff and seeing like, based on our percentages, where are there kind of key differences and things like that. So bunch of relevant material over there. So definitely check that out. I might be doing a bit more content this time of year as well. So maybe some articles. We'll see. So stay tuned. Yeah, definitely keep up on Twitter, and we'll see how much time I have. It's a busy time of year, but
getting Bennett in the content streets. This is dangerous times, but looking forward to it. I'm going to check that out myself over at Shot Quality, but find Bennett on Twitter at 617Bennett, and hopefully getting back on the show here again, talk some more college basketball before the year is done. You can find Ed on Twitter at the Power Rank. You can find his work at thepowerrank.com. Ed, what's going on for you there this week in a very busy week for you in the site?
Yeah, busy, fun week. I've taken kind of a lot of kind of my best, freshest insights and put them into the newsletter. I've been putting them into the podcast the past couple of years. Just didn't work out to kind of do that with the time commitment this year. So a lot of it will go to the newsletter. You can sign up for that at thepowerrank.com. You also get my cheat sheet if you're looking for a last minute fix for filling out your bracket. It's based on my public points-based numbers. So you can check that all out at thepowerrank.com. There's all kinds of good stuff, game-by-game predictions. There's the wheel that has all win probabilities round by round as well. So, go play around there. Have fun with it. And, let me know if you have any questions.
And as Ed mentioned, the member numbers are key as well. So find those over at thepowerrank.com. Check out the Football Analytics Show wherever you get your podcast. I'm on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. We have more NCAA tournament talk coming up on Wednesday. We're going to talk about the Thursday and Friday games from a betting perspective then. So if you want to bet those two games, come back here Wednesday, NFL free agency tomorrow on the show, but plenty more to come here on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. So search for that wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, and if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Also check us out every weekday over on the FanDuel YouTube page. If you're watching on YouTube and saw us sharing the numberFire metrics, you can get those by subscribing to numberFire. That is the paid subscription for this time of year. So just go to numberFire.com, click on the banner at the top for March Madness. Make sure you're subscribed there to fill out your own customized brackets, see win probabilities, stage odds, game simulators, and much more. Want to wish you all a happy NCAA tournament. It is here. It is going to be fantastic. A lot of fun to be had this year. Go win yourself some money. Good luck to everyone. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.